Yat hey, my relatives. Hello, this is Mark Charles. Today is Monday, June 16th. I'm sitting here with my second cup of coffee, and I just wanted to have a conversation with you about some of the chaos going around. When you have a young, immature colonial nation like the United States, populated with undocumented immigrants, mostly white Europeans, who celebrate white supremacists and genocidal leaders like Abraham Lincoln, and have Supreme Court justices who reference the doctrine of discovery as legal precedent, as Ruth Bader Ginsburg did in 2005, and elect convicted felons to the office of POTUS, i.e., Donald J. Trump. You shouldn't be too surprised when the entire system turns into a global circus of bipartisan, unjust, narcissistic chaos. I lament that we are simply reaping, as a nation, what we've sown. I posted that to my Facebook last week. I wasn't sure if I wanted to post it. I wasn't sure if it would come off as too divisive, but I felt like I needed to say something as I was listening to the news and paying attention to all the things that were going on. And I took some time and went for a walk and thought I had written it out. I went for a walk and thought about it and came back and said, yeah, I want to post it. And it's been one of the more popular posts I've had on my Facebook, on my social media in the past several months. And it seemed to really strike a chord with a lot of people. Because as I always try to do, it wasn't coming off as a partisan rant, right? It wasn't just saying the Republicans are horrible or the Democrats aren't doing enough, but it was saying there is some deep systemic problems we're having as a nation, and we're not dealing with them well. We're not getting to the root of the problem. In the midst of chaotic, turbulent times, and divisive times, it can be confusing to know what needs to be protested. I invite you to join me for my cup of coffee today, my second cup of coffee. I'm going to offer my 2 cents. And I invite you to join me. My relatives, I want to start as I always do by acknowledge I'm speaking to you from the land of the Piscataway. It's now called Washington, as my people called it, or Washington, D.C. But the Piscataway, they were here long before Columbus got lost at sea, and they're still here. So I want to honor and acknowledge the Piscataway as the host of the people, as the host of the land where I live. I want to thank them for their stewardship of these lands and just state how humbling it is to be walking, moving, breathing, existing on these lands today. My Piscataway relatives, ahiahat, thank you for your stewardship of these lands. Let me take a brief look and see who's on with me this morning. I know there's a few people who have joined. Jordan, great to see you. Thanks for joining this. I said this morning, it's actually afternoon. It's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I've been hoping to do this podcast. Wanted to start it much earlier this morning, but as always happens, once I sit down to bring my final notes together, there's always something new that's happened. There's always some other thought I have. There's always some other headline that pokes its way through. And so I end up pondering and thinking through, and how can I incorporate everything that's going on, right? The news changes daily, unfortunately, especially here in Washington, D.C. And so, I took several hours today to kind of sort through and filter through all the stuff I've been preparing for the past few days. And I'm excited to talk about them with you today. So thank you for joining me. Grab your favorite morning or early afternoon beverage. And I'm excited to have a conversation. So I want to let you know I am drinking today the last cup of coffee from a roaster that I met when I was in Alaska about a month ago. It's called the Chugach Mountain Roasters. And it was a place where I'm going to post. I just posted the Facebook post that I read for you earlier. Now I want to post in the links. This is the link to the coffee shop where I visited, and I was able to spend some time and get to know the owner of the Chugach Mountain Roasters in Anchorage, Alaska. The owner's name was Lyle. And he and I had a great time just kind of hanging out while I was there. And it was fun to get to know him a little bit. And so I was excited to be able to bring home a bag of his coffee and I've been drinking it on and off for the past several weeks. I actually got 2 bags of coffee, a dark roast for my wife and a medium roast for myself. And there's a picture of me in Lyle's coffee shop. It's not too far from the airport. A lot of the pictures I posted by the lake I walked around and the water planes that I took pictures of were actually within walking distance of both my hotel and this coffee shop. And so it was fun to be there. And if you're ever in the area, I encourage you to visit Lyle and go into the Chugach Mountain Roasters coffee shop. It's a great place to just sit. It opens kind of late. It opens around 8 o'clock in the morning, I believe it was, which surprised me for a coffee shop. But when I thought about it, it actually made sense because this is Alaska, where some days the sun rises really early. I think when I was there, it was rising about before 5 a.m. And it was going even earlier. I think now it's probably up to like 4:15 or 4:30 that it's rising. And other times it rises really late in the day. Right in the winter, it could rise at 9, 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. And so you kind of have to just pick your time, especially if you're a coffee shop. You can't go, well, let's do it at daybreak because that can span almost 8 to 10 hours. So when I thought about it, I'm like, okay, we're in Alaska. Not everything happens when the sun rises. And so they open at 8 a.m. But it was a good coffee shop to go to, great place just to hang out a little bit, and was excited to get to know Lyle, the owner of the coffee shop, and had some good times talking with him. But anyway, I like to do that whenever I travel. I like to visit coffee shops, especially locally owned coffee shops, and get to know the people who own them and try to buy some of their coffee to bring home with me so I can continue to taste it. And once in a while, just mention to you the coffee shops I get to visit around the country. So anyway, that was the coffee shop I visited in Anchorage. I want to talk to you about some of the stuff going on. And I see Steve and Oscar are on this morning. Yeah, hey, my relatives, thanks for joining. I track the news and I try to stay on top of what's going on, but there's chaos going on daily. And especially this last weekend, as you know, we have the war of where Israel attacked Tehran and bombed Iran, and Iran retaliated, and that is escalating. We also had the No Kings protest and the military parade here in DC. I think since my last second cup of coffee, Elon and Trump broke up their bromance, and now they're maybe patching things back up, or at least trying not to be so mad publicly at each other. I don't know what they're doing. Obviously, there are massive protests going on around the country, especially in Los Angeles, where the National Guard has been federalized, and Trump has kind of taken that over, and there's a court battle over that. And yeah, there is so much going on, right? The G7 summit starts, I think, today in Canada, a nation Trump has threatened he wants to take over. And he's gathering with our allies who Trump has spent most of his time in office bullying and belittling and mocking. And so it's a very, very weird time. And it's difficult to stay on top of all of this sort of news. And so I want to just comment a little bit, because the theme of this episode is I want to make sure we're protesting the root of the problem. And so we're going to get to that. We're going to get to the No Kings protest. We're going to get to the military parade. We're going to get to that. But at first, I want to, and because if you remember a few months ago, I was reading a book on what does it mean, what does it look like, and how do you maintain your own health living with a narcissist. Not that there's a narcissist in my home, but in a sense there is, because President Trump has infiltrated our airwaves, our social media, so much of our public space. And he absolutely displays many, many, many of the symptoms of someone who has a narcissistic personality disorder. And so I've been studying, how do you survive living with a narcissist? And part of it is you have to set strict boundaries. Part of it is you have to make sure you have your own mental health and your own space for to maintain your own mental health. You have to exercise and sleep well. And yet it seems like the world is just getting more and more chaotic, and the chaotic world that Trump lives in is becoming the world that is becoming a global environment now. And so I want to just begin to filter through some of this and just point out, because we tend to normalize it when we just see it happening every day, and you either tend to ignore the news or you obsess over it. And I want to just go through some of the headlines, right? So let's talk about the breakup of the bromance quickly between Trump and Elon. That ended in a fiery social media rant between both of them, with Trump posting to Truth Social and Elon posting to X, and them both just screaming at each other, accusing each other of things. And it was a spectacular flame out of two incredibly shallow, wounded, hurting, narcissistic men, or I should say children. But what was most troubling about it was an article I saw a day or two after that happened, where Elon is trying to salvage his billions and his incredible wealth, which has come at the expense of not only the American taxpayers, but many taxpayers around the country. He is one of the most socially supported billionaires in the world, making his money off of revenue from government, but from taxpayers, I should say. But anyway, he's trying to patch that up, and so he was trying to be less in cahoots with Donald Trump, and maybe thinking about reaching out to the Democratic base who supported him for such a long time. And Trump basically said that Elon Musk would face serious consequences if he backed Democratic candidates. And we just have to acknowledge, for a nation that claims to be a global leader, for a nation that claims to not want corruption, for a nation that claims to care about justice, to have the president of that nation threaten anybody personally with serious consequences if they back another candidate, that's not normal, right? That's not normal. That's what corrupt dictatorships do. That's what these cowardly dictators around the nation like Putin and others do. We're not as used to seeing that here in the US, even though we have many, many, many of our own problems. And so I just need to point out this isn't normal, right? And I think what I find most surprising is that the Republican Party is so unbelievably silent about this. And they're not saying anything. And right, regardless of who you voted for, can we at least acknowledge this is not how we want our leaders to speak? None of us want to live in a nation where our president threatens personal vendettas and consequences against people who support people other than them. That's not the world I want to live in. That's the world most Americans don't want to live in. No one wants to live in a world like that, actually. Even people who live we're quickly becoming a dictatorship. But this is not how people want to live. And so we just have to point out how destructive his thinking is. And it's not just people like Elon Musk, billionaires, who literally bought Trump his election with the hundreds of millions of dollars he gave to him at the end of the election and helped him get his message out so much more broadly. But even petty things like the White House picnic invitation that he did not give to Rand Paul because Rand Paul, a Republican, didn't support him. Right? We're dealing with a very petty man in Donald Trump. And it's disturbing to see the lengths he goes to seek out retribution against people who oppose him. And it changes daily depending on the mood he's in from moment to moment. And what's challenging about this is that fear of this retribution is becoming much more well known. And so I want to share this story with you by AP News, where ABC's Terry Morgan was suspended following his social media post calling Trump and Stephen Miller haters. And it's disturbing that he was suspended by ABC because Trump and Miller are absolutely haters. And if our media can't call that out, they can't call out the prejudice, the racism, the sexism by our leaders, if they have to risk getting fired for stating what is literally happening, that is very, very, very disturbing. But those things seem petty in comparison to what happened in Minnesota this weekend with the shooting of several lawmakers, some of them killed. Or the news of what happened in California with the takedown and arrest of Senator Alex Padilla. Asking questions at a news conference by Christine Noem. Right? We just have to acknowledge these are the things our media and our leaders and even our citizens like to point out in other nations. Look at how these third world nations operate. Look at how these leaders operate. They have no control over. They don't understand human rights. They don't understand all this, right? This is what we do. This is how we look down on other nations for doing these types of things. And yet this is becoming not just something we do, it's normalized within our society. Barely even makes the headlines. Barely even makes the headlines. Right? They're massive deportations. Stephen Miller is pushing for 3,000 arrests and deportations a day, leading to incredible protests around Southern California and Los Angeles. And we have, right, all of the chaos that's been going on there with not only federalizing the National Guard, with Trump taking control of the National Guard and that being fought out in court right now, but sending in Marines, U.S. military personnel, who actually detained somebody last week. And I don't have that story here, but they did. They detained somebody. The military detained somebody. And then you read stories like this in the New York Times, where Trump, who has been on an absolute vendetta against immigrants of color, I'm going to say that, because I'm not going to say undocumented immigrants, because technically white Europeans are also undocumented. They have no treaties giving them the right to be here. They have a doctrine of discovery. That's all they have. They have the lie of white supremacy is all they have. The Charter by King James, the Discovery by Columbus, all of those are based on racist ideologies, theologies. They have no treaty. Europeans have no treaty giving them rights to be here. Every treaty they made with Native nations has been broken. The founding documents of this nation refer to us as savages. We are specifically excluded from the Constitution. The only legal right that Europeans claim to be here under is, and this is why as recently as 2005 they referenced the Doctrine of Discovery in land title cases with native nations, because that's all they have. That's the only thing they're using to legitimize their presence here. And so we have one generation of undocumented immigrants trying to figure out what to do with another generation of undocumented immigrants. And there's no integrity in this conversation. And that is absolutely clear in this New York Times story. Trump, who has been lobbied by one of his secretaries, I forget which one, asking him to have less emphasis on farm workers and hotel and restaurant workers. Why? Well, from this story, it says on Thursday, Mr. Trump acknowledged that the crackdown might be alienating industries he wants to keep on his side. Our great farmers and people in the hotel and leisure business have been stating that our very aggressive policy on immigration is taking very good long-term workers away from them, with those jobs being almost impossible to replace, Trump said on social media. Mr. Trump posted after Brooke Rollins, the Secretary of Agriculture, informed him of farmers who were concerned about the ICE enforcement affecting their businesses, according to a White House official and a person familiar with the matter. Mr. Trump has for decades owned luxury hotels, an industry with a strong immigration labor force. And so when his policies, his unjust, merciless, with no integrity policies, began affecting the bottom line of his businesses and began affecting the people who supported him politically, Trump said, oh, maybe we're going too far. And against the advice of Stephen Miller, who's really the one driving all of this, he's backing off. This nation has no integrity. No integrity whatsoever when it comes to immigration. What we have is one generation of undocumented immigrants, most of them from Europe, trying to figure out what to do with another generation of undocumented immigrants, most of them not white, from other parts of the world, many of those places impoverished. There is no integrity in the dialogue without Native peoples, without the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island being brought to the table to bring some of our wisdom and our experience, our understanding, and our integrity into this dialogue. White people, you are never going to figure this out. I don't care how liberal or how conservative your policies are, you are not going to figure this out because you do not have the integrity or the authority to write just and humane immigration law. You don't have no authority whatsoever. Because your own history here is just as undocumented as the people who jumped the fence last week, or a month ago, or 2 months ago. And I would easily argue that the history and the violence perpetrated by these white undocumented immigrants is far worse than the problems being caused by immigrants of color coming from other parts of the world. So it's not just Trump who has no integrity. The Democrats have no integrity either. Trump's not even up to the deportation numbers that Biden had. And Biden wasn't even close to the deportation numbers that Obama had. No one has integrity. I don't care what side of the aisle you sit on. And people are beginning to notice that our nation has no integrity. And they're seeing not just through Trump, but through us as a nation. This article in the AP News this week. As Trump goes to the G7 summit, other world leaders aim to show they're not intimidated by the United States. Quoting from this article, says, but many leaders see fewer reasons to be cowed by Trump, even as they recognize the risk if he follows through on his threats. They believe he will ultimately back down, since many of his plans could inflict harm on the United States, or that he can simply be charmed and flattered into cooperating. Many leaders still seem intimidated by Trump, the article says, but increasingly they are catching on to his pattern of bullying, said Jeremy Shapiro, research director at the European Council on Foreign Relations. In places as diverse as Canada, Iran, and China and the EU, we are seeing increasing signs that leaders now recognize that Trump is afraid of anything resembling a fair fight. And so they are increasingly willing to stand up to him. The world's figuring us out. Trump doesn't have integrity. As a nation, we don't have integrity. We don't. The world figured that a long time ago. I've traveled many parts of the world. When you don't travel with white people, you hear a lot of things about our country. Honest opinions about who we are as a nation and what people think of us. And now the world leaders, who have often been intimidated and scared of US leaders, are now beginning to recognize, yeah, this nation doesn't know what it's talking about half the time. So that brings us to this last weekend. This last weekend, and this is what the news has been absolutely consumed with, is Trump's military parade going through Washington, D.C., and all of the Trump's military parade, as well as all of the No Kings protests going on in up to 2,000 cities around the country. I just shared a story from NPR. 3 takeaways from the military parade and the No Kings protests on Trump's birthday. Critics have said it's a display of military force typically associated with autocratic governments. In places like Russia or North Korea, this is talking about Trump's military parade, which he's wanted since he went to France during his first term in office and saw their parade. And as he's seen in other nations doing, like Russia and North Korea. The New York Times ran an article. 3 are takeaways from Trump's military parade in Washington. It's a vulgar display, Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom of California said during a news conference on Friday. It's the kind of thing we see Kim Jong-un or Putin you see with dictators around the world that are weak. So the Democrats are calling out this parade as un-American. It's what dictators do. However, if you look at the history of military parades, CBS says we don't do them very frequently, but we do them. The last one was, of course, in 1991, after the Gulf War was over. President Bush had a military parade. There's been a lot of talk about the military parades after World War I and World War II. There's been less talk about the military parades of the Cold War era by Eisenhower, I think Roosevelt, and JFK all had military parades at their inaugurations. JFK's was in 1961. I'm going to share a few links with you about those parades. That parade from JFK. This is the White House history, just photos from his inauguration parade. These are 2 YouTube videos I'm sharing of the actual parade on January 20th of 1961. I think I said 18 earlier, sorry, 1961. I encourage you to watch these. They had tanks. They had soldiers. They even had nuclear missiles in the parade. So when we say this is what dictators, this is what weak governments do, they're saying that because it's a political weapon now. They're fighting Trump and he wants a parade. They didn't say this when JFK, a Democrat, had a parade. Not as many people said it after the Gulf War when we won. We had a parade. There were still protests at both of those, but not quite as loud as what's going on. Not like what happened yesterday. And yesterday we had 2,000 protests around the country. People called me, people messaged me, hey, how are you doing? Is it chaos in DC? I always tell people the DC that you live in and the DC you see on the news are 2 very different places most of the time. Yes, the mall was a zoo yesterday. Actually, it wasn't. It was a pretty sparse parade. It was a pretty sparse crowd. It wasn't a zoo. There were a few people there. You can see the pictures. But there were protests, much better attended, even in the area around here, than the actual parade got. And people asked me if I was going to join the protests. And I did not feel inclined to join. Why? I want to take a look, help you understand. I don't know if Chuck Schumer started the No Kings mantra, but in 2024, Chuck Schumer introduced a bill called No Kings. This was after the Supreme Court came out with a ruling giving Trump immunity while he was in office, and Chuck Schumer came out with a bill basically to remove that immunity, saying we don't have kings here. We're all under the rule of law. So the question is, right? Again, I don't know if Chuck Schumer started the No Kings mantra, but it caught on. And yesterday, there were thousands of No King protests all around the country. So where do you think Chuck Schumer was yesterday? Which protest did he join? He's been very critical of Donald Trump. He's been very critical of the Republican Party. What protest to say we are not a kingdom? We are not ruled by a king. We don't have royalty here. Where do you think Chuck Schumer chose to protest yesterday? Well, there was a wedding yesterday, on Saturday. Sorry, not yesterday, on Saturday. There was a wedding on Saturday in New York. New York Times ran a story about this wedding. It was a wedding of Huma Abedin, a longtime aide to Hillary Clinton, and Alex Soros, the scion of a liberal philanthropic dynasty. And the wedding drew a rare concentration of wealth and power. This is quoting from the article. Beyond the couple's families, the guest list included Mrs. Clinton and her husband, former President Bill Clinton, a former Vice President former Vice President Kamala Harris and her husband, Doug. Senator Chuck Schumer was there, and Representative Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic minority leaders from New York. Former Speaker Nancy Pelosi was there. Celebrities like Nikki Hilton, Rothschild, cultural figures like the Vogue editor Anna Wintour, longtime Clinton friends like the San Francisco power broker Susie Tompkins Bial, and foreign dignitaries like the Prime Minister of Albania, Edi Rama. What's most striking is the headlines that New York Times chose for this wedding. And they said the Clintons and Kamala Harris descended on a Hampton wedding of liberal royalty. Liberal royalty. That's hilarious. Chuck Schumer wasn't attending a No Kings protest because he was at a royal wedding of a liberal couple, power brokers, with many of the other liberal power brokers. It's hilarious, right? So while one king from one side of the aisle was having his military parade, not only in line with dictators and weak nations from around the world, but very much in line with what we've done from both sides of our aisle over the history of our country. The other party was attending a wedding of liberal royalty in the Hamptons, filled with wealth and power from around the globe. The article went on to say the wedding may be elite society's most coveted summer gathering for only a matter of weeks. Later this month, some of the same guests will travel to Venice for the nuptials of a different power couple, Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez. You see, the problem is the No Kings protest doesn't go deep enough. The No Kings protest Donald Trump, who needs protesting. Don't get me wrong. He absolutely is a mess and is doing things that I think are despicable, and he deserves and needs to be held accountable. But if you think Donald Trump is the root of the problem, you are not paying attention. This is what our nation does. To this day, we use a doctrine of discovery to legitimize the presence of white Europeans in this nation. To this day, our Declaration of Independence refers to natives as merciless Indian savages. To this day, slavery is legal under the protection of the 13th Amendment. In our criminal justice system, neither slavery nor voluntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereas the party has been duly convicted, shall exist. Slavery is absolutely legal in this nation. One party was having a military parade, the other party was having a royal wedding. And the party running the royal wedding got their peasants, right? Us, just the common people, all riled up to go protest. Well, they didn't go. And the other party got their peasants, their common people, to attend a parade honoring not our military. If you think that parade was about the military, don't fool yourself for a moment. That parade was about Donald Trump's ego and nothing else. I don't want to protest a king. I want to protest the empire. No empire. Let's protest that. If you think the problem is Trump, you don't understand our nation's history. And if you think Trump's the solution, you don't understand our nation's history. The United States of America is absolutely and has been since its founding an empire. I highly recommend this book by Daniel Amirwar. I talked about him with a second cup of coffee almost a year and a half ago. How to Hide an Empire. We have done an amazingly effective job to hide our empire, which has tentacles stretching around the globe. That's what needs to be protested. That's what needs to be fought against. That's what needs to be corrected. That's where the root of the problem is. It's that we are an empire to this day, whether left or right, Democrat or Republican. We are an empire. And that's what we need to protest. So no, I did not join the protest last week because, yes, Trump is a problem. But the protests this week were about Trump and nothing else. And the leaders of the other party couldn't even bother to come to the protests. They were out at a royal wedding. So on Saturday, I stayed home with my family. We didn't go down to the mall, did some shopping, went to the farmer's market, hung out as a family a little bit. On Sunday, we celebrated Father's Day, cooked some good food, ate some good food, enjoyed being together as a family. I tried not to let the chaos, the lies, and the deception from both sides of the aisle interrupt what actually was a very beautiful weekend here in DC and allowed for some very good time with family and conversations with friends. We need to protest. I don't deny that for a moment. But we have to protest the right thing. The No Kings protest doesn't get to the heart of the problem. We need a No Empire protest. And we're not ready to have that protest yet. I mean, I would love to, but we're not ready. A, the majority of US voters voted for Trump and wanted what this is in the first place. B, those who didn't vote for merely voted for the other party, which is just as imperial as the Republican Party. Neither one of the parties are interested in fixing the root of the problem. How do I know? Because I ran for president in 2020. I talked with these people. I listened to them. I critique them, read my books, listen to. But I did get some hope this weekend. You know what gave me hope? There was a baseball game at Dodger Stadium over the weekend. And a singer and social media personality named Neza was invited to sing the national anthem. She's Latina, Hispanic. And they were very clear with her. Apparently, they expected her to sing in English. And she sang the national anthem at the Dodger game against the wishes of the Dodger organization. She sang it in Spanish. Oh, I wish I would have been there. especially knowing the organization didn't want her to do it and told her not to. I love that. I love that. What a fantastic protest in the midst of LA against the wishes of the 1% class. Singing a song, the national anthem of the United States of America in Spanish. I applaud you, Neza. I applaud your protest. You inspired me this weekend. I know I gave you a lot of information today, a lot of stories. I encourage you to read these stories. I encourage you to follow up on what I've said. We have major problems as a country. One of those problems is Trump. One of those problems is the Republican Party. But another problem is the Democrats. It's not just about no kings. We need no empire. And we are 100% a global empire. And we have to challenge the root of the problem. Violence is never the answer. Insults and degrading people needlessly are never the answer. We need to find a way to talk about the roots of our problems. We need to find a way to have civil dialogue about our differences. We need to not be whipped into a frenzy by partisan media, which is literally just making money off of our anger and our divisions. I go back to the quote I've used over and over and over again: where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. If you want to build a community, you have to start by creating common memory. This is our nation's problem. Neither the left nor the right understand the history of this nation. They don't know what this nation was built on. They think we have partisan problems and that those partisan problems are the roots of our problems, and they're not. The challenge with this nation is our foundations are bad. As I've told you before, I am literally planning and doing everything I can to teach our history and to travel. My speaking invitations have dwindled to a virtual stop in the past several months with the Trump administration's attack on DEI. I'm working on a fundraising for what I call a common memory tour. I'm planning events around the country. I have 2 events coming up, one this month and one next month. In June 28th, I'm going to be in Gallup, New Mexico, speaking to the Social Justice and Equity Institute of New Mexico. We don't have a location yet, but June 28th in the evening from 4 to 6 p.m., late afternoon, I'll be speaking. On Sunday, July 13th, from 6 to 8 p.m., I will be in Soddy Daisy Woodlands Gathering near Chattanooga, Tennessee. I am trying to schedule more events in New Mexico around June 28th. I'm trying to schedule more events on my way down and on the way back from Chattanooga, Tennessee. I am doing everything I can to teach our history, to build a better common memory. not to cancel people, not to insult people, not to hurt people, but to help us understand the root of our problems so that for the very first time we can have healthier community across racial lines, which we've never had in this country. We've never had a healthy community in this country across racial and gender and those types of lines. That's my vision. That's what I'm working on. That's what I want to do. I don't want to have this partisan bickering back and forth. I don't want to be a pawn in the stage battle between white landowning men from the left and the right of the aisle. My vision has been and continues to be to build a nation where we the people actually means all the people. And that's why about every week or so, I sit down with a second cup of coffee and have a conversation. I'm so glad you could join me today. I'm so grateful for your willingness to engage in these conversations with me. I invite you to continue to follow me on social media. If you want to go deeper into the conversation, you can go into my Patreon. I use my Patreon as a way to keep my voice independent, so I don't have to rely on advertising from social media. I do my best to speak as independently as possible, to not just go into a partisan critique, but really to look at things from a bipartisan level and to try to understand the root and the foundations of our problems. So my relatives, we had hoped to do a Q&A for Unsettling Truths today, but I hadn't received any questions about that, and I really wanted to talk about the stuff going on. And so we will schedule that later this month or early next month. If you have not read my book that I co-authored on Unsettling Truths, I put it up here. You can get signed copies from my website. You can also get a 10-pack from my website for a book study. And if you do buy the 10-pack and you get the book study, I will give your book study a free virtual 45-minute Q&A to talk about and answer questions about the book. So anyway, my relatives, I appreciate you. Thank you for joining me. I hope your second cup of coffee is as good as mine is. I'm traveling for the next few days, but I'll be back on Wednesday evening or Thursday morning, and I'm hoping to do another second cup of coffee before the end of the week. I have not yet talked about the conflict between Israel and Iran, but that is something that absolutely needs to be talked about. And I also just want to talk more about the history and to help people understand the historical problems we're facing as a nation. My relatives, walk in beauty. And may we all learn how to walk in beauty together. Hakone.